Here is the Canopy frame back on the bench, and like I promised, I'm going to show you some of the details that I've been talking about. First of all, if you can see the holes in the hinges, and of course the bushings are in place, you can see that they came out quite well. Edge distance is very good. The hole is just about centered. It's not perfect, but it's very close, very nice. Very pleased with that. This, of course, is the other side here. So that worked out very well. And at this point, I haven't done anything else to the frame. I haven't drilled any extra holes. I haven't match drilled anything except for these 4 holes here on each hinge. You've got the hinge flange on the back side. I match drilled the flange to the frame. And again, this is what I was talking about. If you can imagine that the hinge is pinned to the fuselage when you have it installed, this is pinned in place, but you can move the frame forward and back and up and down. So that's your adjustment to get the skin to lay right. And then of course you match drill it. Keep in mind, again, if the hinge is pinned in place with your skin clecoed to the frame, when you do actually rivet this together, this is going to close, this gap in here is going to close up, and that in effect is bringing the frame back, which is going to open up the gap between this skin and the fuselage skin. So you want to make sure that this is nice and tight. These are nice and tight to each other when you're initially fitting everything before you start match drilling and things of that nature. Now, I had talked about potentially putting shims underneath this to bring the frame forward, to bring the frame itself forward to close up the gap. That could potentially work. However, these couple of rivets through the skin are going to start interfering with these rivets going through the hinge. You can see that this rivet is pretty much directly over top of this one. And same here, this one is pretty much over top of this one. So if you start fitting shims underneath here and bringing the hinge back, or in another way to look at it is pushing this frame forward, you're going to have problems getting in here and riveting these rivets. So at this point, I've not decided on anything. I've got the holes drilled, but I haven't done anything in this orientation. So the other thing that I had talked about was the diagonal bend. When you look at, let me see if this is a better angle. This might be a little bit better because of the lighting. When you look at the frame itself, there's a pretty hard bend right here. You can see that diagonal bend. So this is vertical, this is flat and vertical, and then there's this hard corner. Off of that corner, you've got this bend. When you bring the skin down around here and you cleco it to the frame here, and you try to cleco it along the bottom in these pre-drilled holes, it doesn't want to come down and make that hard turn. It won't lay flat against here. There's a lot of stress on the skin itself, and the clecos don't have the strength to pull that down. Even if they did, for me personally, I don't like to have things stressed and rely on clecos and or the rivets to pull everything down and hold it in place. I try to work the stress out of the parts before I rivet them. So to get the skin to lay nice across this face and to get it to lay nice across this face and to take some of that bending stress out of the skin, I put a very slight bend in the skin itself to match this diagonal. And it's relatively easy to do because you've got some points to reference off of. You've got the corner here, and you've got these row of rivets, and you can see the bend basically goes right through this rivet here. So you can duplicate this quite easily on the skin and then give the skin a matching bend. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to make it nearly as abrupt as I had done on the other skin. I'm going to try to make it a little bit more subtle, but still try to get some of that stress out of the skin itself. The other thing that I'm going to do, when I had the frame and the skin on the airplane, I tried to open and close it, and I couldn't because the skin of the frame was interfering with the skin here. It was digging into it and it wouldn't allow me to open it. So I have to do something about that. And I also noticed that on this side here, the frame, the canopy skin came up really nice all the way around here, tight. But on this side, it did not. For some reason, I was having a little bit of a gap open up on this side. When I would open the frame a little bit, of course, it pulls that skin back. And then when I would close it, it would not close that gap back up. And the reason is because, like I've talked about before, here's your hinge mount. This mounts here. This is pinned in place. The rest of this frame coming down and the rest of the frame going back, that all floats freely in space. There's nothing for it to nothing supports it. So from this hinge down to this corner, this is all, you can manipulate all of this pretty easily forward and back because there's no structure that it attaches to. It just kind of flops in the breeze. So I'm going to try to anchor this hinge point. I haven't figured it out yet, but I may try to put the hinge in a vise or somehow hold the hinge point on the frame stationary. And then ever so slightly take this corner and try to tweak it forward just a little bit. Try to put a little bend in it, just enough to move it forward like a 1/16 of an inch, so that it will naturally, when it opens and closes, that will want to naturally lay forward a little bit and close up this gap. So I'm going to address those two issues next. I'm going to put a little bit of a bend on the skin, that diagonal bend. I'm going to do that on the skin. And like I said, I'm going to try to anchor the hinge to hold it stationary in this leg of the frame ever so slightly. I'm going to try to push this corner forward. And again, you got to be mindful that every time you tweak something, it's going to affect something else, right? Because you've got pre-punched holes on the frame, you got pre-punched holes on the skin, and you've got a lot of flexibility in some of these parts. So just be mindful. You make a change, it's going to affect other things. So that's the plan. Let me see how things go, and I'll talk to you later. Once again, back at the airplane, I've got the canopy frame and the canopy skin back pinned in place. What I had done was I decided to experiment a little bit, and I went ahead and made a couple of small shims. And I've got those clecoed between the main frame and the hinge. And that, in effect, slides the skin forward. Having done that, the fit is actually pretty exceptional now. You can see this seam is pretty much gone. It's pretty much a very snug, perfectly aligned fit. There's virtually no gap. So, a couple of things, as always, right? Every time we do something, there's always some couple of things. Geez, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So like I said, shimming, putting the shims in there, moved the skin forward, and it basically closed up the little gap that I had across the front. It also moved since the frame underneath is all connected to itself, it also moved that, I think that it's not half inch. I think is it 7/16? Whatever it is, the tubing that's in here underneath, it also moved that tubing forward. So now when I look through the holes, I can still see my black line, but it's no longer centered on the hole. It's almost completely gone forward of the hole. It's not too bad, but, or I'm sorry, the line on the tube is now aft of the hole, just on the aft edge of the hole, because the skin has moved forward. So I'm not too concerned about that because, like I said, the tubing itself is pretty wide. It's almost a half inch wide. The shim that I had used is 0.032. So I've shifted the skin 32 thousandths forward. And now my black line that was centered in these holes is no longer centered underneath the holes. The other thing is I cannot get this thing to open at all. Now, the interference between these two skins is completely preventing it from opening. So, not really sure what to do with that going forward, because obviously you need some kind of a gap in there to get the canopy to open, but you don't want such a big gap that it looks like crap, and you don't want water flooding in there potentially when it rains, things of that nature. So, don't know what I'm going to do with that going forward, but I just wanted to show, at least demonstrate. Again, I haven't done anything permanent. I can pull those clecos out of the hinges, pull those spacers out of there, and no harm done. I could potentially go with a thinner spacer. As I said, those are 32 thousandths. I can go back to a 20 thousandths, 25 thousandths, something like that. However, like I said, with the spacers in place, this fits really, really nice now. Even when I try to open and close it, when I open up a gap in here by moving the canopy up and down, when it's back down all the way, that gap is completely gone. It just, to me, it feels nicer because I can manipulate the canopy a little bit. And then when it's down, it's down. That seam is completely flat and flush. You can see from this perspective, again, this flat plane compared to this flat plane, that also is slightly better. And I'll explain why, I believe, here in a minute. There's still a little bit of a step right here. And this side, I don't think there are any. If it is, it's very minimal. But what I had done, like I said I was going to do, I had, I don't know if that's going to show up, but I started to work on a little bit of that diagonal crease through the skin. And I also took about from the edge, I don't know, about 8 inches or so, I kind of rolled this by hand a little bit. I had it flipped upside down, and I took the end and I just kind of tried to roll, put a little bit of a tighter bend on this, on the ends on both sides. And I think that relieves some of the stress, and it allows places like this to lay down a little nicer. The other thing that you can see without the clecos across here, these are the pre-punched holes across the bottom. You can see just how much the skin sticks out away from the frame underneath. So you can imagine when you run clecos through here, it's trying to close up all of that gap. And you can see how it's pushing the frame around. So that's what I don't like. That's what I'm talking about trying to fix. I'm trying to figure out a way to get the skin basically pre-bent so it's already formed when it sits onto the frame. And the clecos basically hold it from moving around and not so much forming the shape of it. So for now, I'm not going to mess with the shims at this point. I'm going to leave everything nice and tight. My gut tells me that when this starts getting riveted together, it's going to shift, and I doubt it's going to shift for the better. It's probably going to open up. So I'm not going to mess with the shims anymore. I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to figure out how I can get this skin to lay better. And then at that point, I might start doing some rivets. Of course, see, now that I think about it, I don't know what to do about that, because if I start match drilling into the frame as is, and then I come back and say, you know what, I don't want that shim in there, I'm stuck. The frame is no longer going to move in relation to the skin because I've got all of this other structure riveted in place or drilled and clecoed. So before I start messing with any of these holes, I got to make absolutely sure what shim, if any, I'm going to use up front. So here we go, right? One thing leads to another, leads to another. So I got some stuff to figure out. I'm going to try to get this skin to lay better on the frame, things of that nature. And then we'll move on. All right, I'm starting to ramble, but again, I just want to demonstrate that there are some options. The written instructions that Vans provides, they're actually really, really good. When I had done the skins and the frame the first time reading through the instructions, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what to expect. So reading the instructions and working through it, I couldn't see far enough ahead to make sense of it, to be like, oh, okay, I understand what they're trying to get you to do, type of thing. Having been through it, now it all makes sense. When I read through the instructions, it makes sense to me now. It's like, okay, I already know what you're trying to say, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I haven't done everything in the same order. I've jumped around a lot, but my point of this video, the Canopy video, is to basically demonstrate again that there are options, there are ways to do things a little bit differently or do them in a different order to get potentially a little bit better of a result. Using shims on the hinges is not ideal, but if I didn't shim the hinges in order to get the skin forward, I would have had to have made underneath the structure here those metal stops that the hinges butt up against. Those would have had to be made thinner. That would have allowed the hinge to come forward, which would have allowed this gap to be closed, and then I wouldn't need any shims. However, doing that, the hinge would have been moved forward, and then when you drill the holes for the hinges, now you're dealing with edge distance issues. So this is kind of a best of both worlds type of thing. You saw the hinge holes. Those looked really good. And now with a very small shim, I've got a really, really good looking seam. I hope I can keep that going. Let me try to figure out some more stuff. I apologize for the rambling and the choppiness of the overall videos, but I'm trying to work through it baby steps, and I want to make sure I capture everything on video, so it's a little clunky. I get it. But, okay, moving on.